Good. Declare the council meeting open, and we have item number 21.9.11 Clyde Wastewater Project, and we have to speak to it. Patrick. Thank you, Patrick.
Sure, Kato. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. Are we waiting for anyone or? Okay. I'll take the report was being read. Just got a little bit of background information for you that might answer some questions you might have. So, the securing of local labour with the level of expertise and competence required to maintain full crews to complete the work has proved extremely challenging. There have been some success stories though, and site in the articulation contract, they've got 3 staff on their roll as cadets. But due to lack of local experienced staff, site has had to provide more of their teams from Christchurch, which has had a bit of another impact that's been expressed here in the report. As the years progress, the pressure on staffing and resourcing has increased. A lot of you would have seen that in your various roles and life around the district, I'm sure. I would like to say that site have absorbed any internal cost increases in terms of labour and plant hire from the rates that they submitted in April 2020. In terms of the contract type or how we're doing the work, we have actually been able to find savings during the course of the contract because of the type of work that we've got with site. And that's probably added up thus far to about $500,000. So it's not all one-way traffic. I won't get into the detail. I've been through some of it with the project governance group as we've been moving through the project. But yeah, that's just a little bit of background info for you. If you've got any questions or backup information you want, I'll report.
Just to what Patrick's been saying. So our original budget for the program of work that makes Clyde Wastewater Project in the 2018 and 2021 LTP was 16.5 million. So that while Patrick's just talked about the reticulation contract and the issues that we've had on the reticulation contract, this project's made up from the main pipeline that went through some work here in Alexandra to connect into the Alexandra Wastewater Treatment, as well as the main Clyde pump station contract. And just as an example, you know, we actually included that construction in the original contract that was awarded that we now priced by site. When the price came back on the reticulation, we actually pulled the pump station out of that contract to tender that on a cost-centric contract model. We subsequently had to change the pump that we had specified because the pump was withdrawn from the market by the supplier. So we had to go back and do some redesign. So we've had increased redesign costs in there and delays in the tendering. That delay of just over a year resulted in a $1 million cost increase from the year before and the price that had been provided by a contractor. So they're the kinds of increases that we're seeing in the marketplace when you're looking at price tension against contracts. And they're not things that we're able to control. They're due to the global pandemic that's going on, the supply of materials, the pressure resourcing from the huge injection of government funding into infrastructure upgrades. And the Auckland lockdown, roll down here, we can carry on with our lives and be a little bit blissfully oblivious to what's happening in Auckland. When you're working in this kind of sector, there's specialist people who come through to do specific bits of work from Auckland that gets delayed. The supply of materials coming out of Auckland's all been delayed, and we've seen costs rising as a consequence of lockdown in Auckland as well.
Thank you. Anything, Patrick? Questions, comments?
Sorry, Julie, what increased by $1 million in 1 year?
So that was the Clyde wastewater pump station. So it was a bit over a year. And We had a price around 2.5 million and it came in at.
Yeah, we had an estimate of about 2.4 million.
Yeah.
And it came in at just over 3.4 million. And the extension of time that happened due to issues with the pump didn't help, obviously. And like Julie says, the course of time, we've seen the explosion of prices and rates there.
But the sort of pumps that we're buying, they're coming in from Europe. And so the global shipping rates are really impacting the supply of some of those materials in terms of cost. So there's been 333% increases in shipping costs internationally. So that we're not immune to that here. That affects us.
Affects us. Literally at the bottom of the plane. Couple of questions. Who did the estimate on the pump station?
So the pump station estimate was originally done by Stantec, but the price from site wasn't far off that when they crossed it. That kind of validated that price wasn't a mile out.
Just to check, page 274, just under 4 financial considerations, it says includes a 10% contingency. But then on page 276, under the risk analysis, it says a 5%.
Yeah, I noticed that as well.
Typo?
It should be 10%.
Thank you.
We did consider different contingencies through the preparation of this report. Where we landed was it was better to go with a high contingency at this point, and if we don't need it, we won't draw down the loan for that amount of money.
I don't have a problem with that answer. I had a problem if the 10% was wrong and we're looking at 5% because I think that would be
Initially, as you've seen, it was 3.5. We reviewed that and would like to put 10%.
Inflation's running thick into 5.
Any other questions? Neil?
There's the odd comment or two out there in the community about this is what you get when you award the contract to someone from out of town, that sort of thing, and especially in relation to the big rocks that have been encountered and those sort of things. But just clarify for me, those rocks will still be there no matter which contractor was doing the job, wouldn't they?
Sorry.
The rocks would still be there no matter who the contractor was.
Absolutely.
Good. Just want to make sure I hadn't missed anything.
Yeah.
And look, we're seeing prices increase on projects regardless of who is the contractor, and we've got prices on some contracts that are being delivered by local contractors that are increasing as well.
Questions, comments? Yeah. Sorry. I mean, it's a considerable increase. To put it in context, against the 2018-21 budget of 16 million, it's roughly a 25% increase, which once would have sounded a lot. In today's world, it sounds not quite as bad. And on page 273, it lists what Patrick and Judy have been talking about the conditions, the underground conditions, underground services, availability of staff, and just there's just no doubt that from pre-COVID times when inflation was virtually nil and there was competition in sharp pencils in the tendering world, we're now in an explosion of inflation, and it's not going to stop anytime soon, I would suggest. And it is what it is. So we have...
Nigel, just before you do that, I guess I should probably give some context to my really flippant question. But it was based on the fact that the work that was done in the lead up to this contract being awarded to consider all of those sort of things. And these ground conditions, I'm expecting, have absolutely surprised everybody, because there would have been no expectation what everybody thought was in Clyde. And there's how many septic tanks have been dug in Clyde? Everything there is. And I don't know that anybody has said about the reports of finding big rocks and those sort of things, and I'm sure they're just not all conveniently put in the street. But it's a classic case is that sometimes no matter how much hard work you do in the front end of trying to get things right, these sort of things are unexpected. And I don't know, Patrick, we've had to, what sort of work would you have had to have done to find out that you had rocks like this, those sort of things?
We did do test pits.
Yep.
There were test pits dug in Clyde in preparation for the estimates and designs for this project, and those test pits didn't show up as well. So we put test pit and we did a number of them. I think it was about 7 across the whole town.
So
from memory.
there's not only test pits that we've dug as part of the contract work, there's also the anecdotal evidence of all the septic tanks that have been dug in Clyde and disposal fields, and nothing to indicate what has ultimately been found.
It looks like if we need some rock or a reinstatement or a flood or anything, we're going to have a good source of rock.
You've got somewhere to sort, so you stockpile them all somewhere. Good. That's something to do with that.
Okay, any further comment, question? Do I have a mover for recommendations A, B and C? Cheryl? Second Tracy? Any further comment? Got the motion, all those in favour?
No.
Against? Carried. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks very much.
Over to you, Stu.
Welcome on to the roading part of the meeting. I'd like to call on James to come up on section 21.9.12 and give us an update on our 3 wonderful bridges in the Minnetonka. And take us through the bit of work done over the while to start and do it. So, thanks, James.
Good afternoon, and taking the report is read. The purpose of the report was really to provide an update where we're at with 3 bridges on council about now. Currently close to traffic, and there's been some updates since I last spoke to you on the 22nd of September. So 3 bridges, I need to cover them: Scott Lane, Manitoba Road, and Road Runs. At the last catch up on the 22nd of September, there had been a few delays with rain events and river level affected, and we actually get the detailed investigation of the structures completed. So yeah, thankfully that has now been completed. I'll just go through each of the updates that we will have. For Lindgren Runs Road, given its current condition, Becca estimated a remaining useful life of timber components about 20 to 30 years, so that's actually quite good news. The principal defect as to why the road is closed, the bridge is closed, at the moment, is relating to some rotten beams where they tie into the abutments. It's kind of an old school that does have some issues. So there is a repair methodology we're looking for in the background. We can actually accommodate that repair within our existing. Because of Minnetonka Road, or better known as Hawks Ford, the latest inspection by Becca found the poles and the pole gaps have essentially reached the end of the useful and economic design. One is a 93-year-old bridge now. Replacement of the piers and the pole gaps, so the poles and pole gaps, sorry, is actually a really difficult and expensive exercise. In order to replace those, you have to completely disassemble the structure. It just wouldn't be prudent to replace the piles and then put the old beams, the old geek back on top of it. So really we are looking at it as a bridge for age and use. Therefore, recommended that access to the structure should be removed and prevented from unauthorised use of the bridge and consider replacement. It was anticipated we'd have some firm estimates for resource meeting on that bridge, but it's just that bridges are a complex thing, not something we can order off the shelf and have here. So there's a process to work through, and what I'm anticipating is we'll have a report up the 26th of January with some firmer estimate cost scope and options for council to consider, and not only this site but also Scotland. I guess the nature of the Taiga River at Hawks Ford is not very favourable for a cost-effective structure. So really, what feasibility in the background of that Sulphur has proven is that really would need to be a replacement bridge if anything. As I say in the report, it did highlight some estimates, and our new structure at that location is looking in the order of about $540,000. I know there's been some lower values out there bandied by some of the public, but the reality is in the current climate we're in, there has been significant increases in material supply, particularly steel concrete, and that's reflected in the updated cost I've seen. It does have a contingency with 15% in it, but you know, that would be a sensible decision in the current climate.
So if I could just add to what James said there, we have gone to the manufacturer that one of the property owners had fixed in one of their statements. That manufacturer has given us the price. That is what our $540,000 is based on. The price that was being bandied around out there didn't include the abutments. You can't put a bridge in without anything to hold it at the end. So just some of those prices that are being talked about in the community, you just have to be aware they're missing a few key components. When you add those in, the price starts ramping up quite quickly.
Yeah, add to that, that's things that can happen with us, private items, building crane pads, visiting structures. And it's, yeah, and removal of the old structure, of course, you know, there's beams and do hold some value, so rather than just rip it all out quickly, would probably paint a little part of slower and recover some of the beams that do hold value, could possibly be used elsewhere. So there will be an update, thoughts and options table for the January report to consider. In terms of Scott Lane Bridge, a repair was obviously not proven. 3 or 4 of the sections were actually like physically really restricted for that review. So, you know, it wouldn't make sense to reinstate those immediately or structural measures. The Kybe Road is really quite dynamic at that location. It's an 80 metre repair. It's a 49 metre area, which really makes options across the infrastructure challenging in the space of working with the professional bodies. So I engaged with Becca for a feasibility later on, what could be considered at this location. And 3 options were essentially tabled what could be considered. One was take the old structure out and put a natural form crossing and slightly improve with some rock stabilisation of the bed, which was the cheapest option, limits the road to be used by the public and would have ongoing maintenance issues. The most appropriate cost-effective structure put forward was essentially like a battery box culvert, which is a series of box culverts, 3 wide, covering a span of 50 metres. Not necessarily a cheap option really in the scheme of things. My estimates at the moment put it about 650 to 750, but even be a touch more. And the third option will be obviously removal of the old structure and build a new bridge, new single lane bridge, multi-span, covering 50 metre distance. And I mean, high level estimates put that. I've noted 1.2, but actually since then it's looking close to $1.2 million. And that's talking with other, you know, reputable companies that build bridges off the shelf around the country. Yeah, it is a difficult one, really. So the estimates I've given really factor on, they are estimates, I can't stress that enough. There's been no hydrological or engineering investigation done yet that really narrows the criteria of what would be required for the site. One is public asset has right process has to be followed. That can take time. You said, wrapping it up, I'm hoping to have at this stage a report table for the 26th.
There will be some challenges around funding, with particularly we had $500,000 budgeted per annum for replacement of structures, but these bridges.
And I was supposed to give that a little bit of context. We're near completion. As part of the bridge strategy I spoke about, I think back in September or so, we're nearing completion of inspecting all the structures in our district. And at the last round was a 2-week window, and they found another 5 structures. Nothing that can't be fixed, but that all comes out of that same budget. Really, these bridges that don't have diversions or detours in place. So it's coming back to that prioritisation conversation and something to be considered. And you know, I've just got the projects that are, you know.
Tim, couple of questions. Firstly, thanks for getting the report done. And there's been a lot of pressure from Maniototo folks saying what the hell's going on. But it's not as easy as you say, they're complex beasts.
Absolutely.
One thing that's in here, well, that's not in here, that it probably has been, I'm sure has been looked at, but it's some of these bridges, the how many vehicle movements were there before they were damaged, and how much of an inconvenience is it for, if they're not there? Is it an impossibility to go, given, you know, sometime in some of these places, we might have to say no, but that's not in here.
We have got, most of these bridges, we've actually done traffic counts on in the last few years, so we will have that information recorded, and we can provide that information in a report that comes back on the 22nd of January. What we know is that none of them have very high traffic volumes, and if you look at, for example, the Clyde Bridge has a restriction on it, and all the trucks have to travel around through Alexandra. That detours of way more. These ones were for weight restrictions, so we were basically, that's why we were doing the counting, was to understand how much we might have been impacting on vehicles having to do detours of weight restrictions.
We'll need to know the cost benefit ratio,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
if
But I do know the number for many Tokyo Road was around the order of total today.
But is there another question to what Tim was saying, is saying if you were starting with a blank sheet of paper, would you put a bridge there?
And
Or would
that's
you put a
what-
road there? So just because there's one there now, and just because there's a road either end of it,
And the report
Yeah.
of the police system may actually have some alternative options.
Right.
You see the legal road.
because go and have a look at the Clutha River upstream of Bendigo and see how many punt crossings there are where there was a bridge in terms of punt, and you could put a bridge today. In fact, someone's probably going to build one for cycles, perhaps. But you know, just because there's a road leading to both sides doesn't mean to say there has to be a bridge.
So that is why we want to do a bridge strategy for the district, looking at all of the bridges that are going to come to the end of their lives in the near future. If you had this much money, what would you replace? And if you had a bit more money, what would you replace? Because a lot of bridges have alternative routes. And 96 years ago, transport was quite different to what transport is today. So the ability to drive around is a whole lot easier than it was 96 years ago when these bridges were built. So that needs to be taken into consideration as well.
don't spend millions of dollars to solve inconveniences.
For very small numbers.
Yeah. The second, sorry, I had two questions. The second one I had was, we mentioned ORC, water regulations, so forth. Are we going to be told we're not allowed to set foot in creeks to build bridges or fords because we might upset the gravel or something?
We will have consent conditions put on us around managing the impacts while that happens. What it tends to affect is some of the options we might look at around putting in piped culvert crossings, because you need to do more work to make it more attractive for fish passage through the culverts. I would say, having actually had the opportunity to look at the conference overseas, that what they do internationally is way more advanced than what we do here in terms of looking after the fish through culverts. It's quite to rebuild that rocks in the bottoms of the culverts to look like a river, so there's not a difference, whereas we just pop it in.
Is that invasive pest fish or is it native?
Yeah.
Well, it's underground, mate.
Right.
That's actually up to the rules have certain type, not only the ORC, national policy statements. What might have been accepted in the past is very difficult now, or actually just not. It severely limits what we might consider would be or appropriate in our district.
Thank you.
Neil?
Speaking of ORC,
Sorry?
speaking of ORC, in terms of the activity in the catchment and what causes these bridges, given they're old, sure, that's part of it. But is there some other factors at play here that organisations like the Otago Regional Council may have a role to play and actually have caused this in the first place? Now, many years ago, we had a bit of a row. We tried to have a discussion, dare I say, with ORC in the Lindis River at Cluden Bridge, when the bridge got wiped away because a whole lot of trees came down. And those trees were the direct result of someone working for the regional council, chopping down trees in the waterway and leaving them there, so in the floodplain, and the trees wiped the bridge out. We've got the situation arising again. Is this a contributing factor here?
That's what happened here.
Yes, so Scott, to answer that, Scott Lane, one of the biggest contributing factors why that Scott Lane was debris loading. It was obviously quite flow, but debris loading from vegetation in the river.
So do we know whose debris it was? You know, anyway, I'm not trying to finger ORC here, but, you know, did the local farmers, dare I say, contribute to it, or was it just an entirely natural event and stuff happens?
We lost 400 metres of road just south of the bus hotel, so, you know, there was no vegetation there, for example, but with the roadway, so it was pretty wild.
Yeah, but we do know that debris and bridges don't go well together. And if someone left the debris in the floodplain, then
Certainly didn't help.
then the ratepayer deserves to have that person held to account.
Well,
In this case, I don't think that was the case. I absolutely vividly remember the Coodan case, and that it was pretty clear that there's tree felling that at the bridge and took it out. In this case, it tends at the Scots Lane, because I've looked at it many times over the years, it tends to be broom and gorse, things that kind of wrap around the bridge piles, because they have a whole lot of timber piles that just gets mixed up. Fencing under bridges can be a real problem when farmers might run a fence along under the bridge that can get in a flood that catches stuff as well. But I don't think in this case we could really blame it.
there were sawn trees that were going down there that were stockpiled higher up the river. The farmers are pretty angry about that, but Stephen.
So given what James has reported about 5 minutes ago, about what we're likely to see in the future, is the budget satisfactory? Have we got enough budget?
So we hugely increased the budget this time around. We used to only have $100,000 a year for the bridge. Yeah, and now we've got $500,000 a year. So that was recognising that this. We've known for some time that the cost, the council is facing a looming issue. All of New Zealand is facing a looming issue with these bridges that were just during the Depression. New Zealand coming to the ends of their life. So I think there'll be some more national direction on some of this that comes out, maybe from what I could tell you. And facing this problem, Southland have had some quite high profile ones.
There'd be a list of critical bridges that budget that type of bridge for.
Sure.
It's definitely natural.
So we might worry just about answer, but particularly the Scott Lane Harbour, like you said, Harbour was quite dynamic at that point. So when you're looking at alternatives, will you be looking at relocating and then going up or down the street to get away from that?
Yeah. And it's
part of the.
not a lot of options. It's pretty wild that way down there.
Just another comment which has come out of the Targa regional roading meetings that I've been a part of, is gravel flows are increasing in all of the bridges in the lower part of the South Island. And that's something that's affected a lot of the bridges in storm events. I know in Southland, a lot of the gravels come right up. In the old days, people say you've got a horse through it sort of scenario, but there's been, for some reason, been massive gravel flows from the Waitaki district right through to Te Anau, and that has also been a problem because some of us have been sitting under bridges and the amount of water going through it. But in Mackay, and I know it is an issue that you talk about the Linders, it worries me that, and I had a person ringing me exactly about the Scots Lane Bridge last week, is how much work are the council or the regional council doing 300 metres top and bottom of the bridges to protect the structures. And it is again an ongoing thing, and some of that stuff with broom and gorse, and that's ORC stuff too, that's weeds and pests on their land. And that's always a hard one because our ratepayers are ultimately going to pay or not pay for debris down the riverway, which is their management. Those box culverts in Scott Lane, they're big, aren't they? But rather than a metre ones, right?
Oh, yeah, no, they're sizable, yeah.
So was the whole idea of a box culvert not to allow the water to run over the top, and it does go over?
It is, but it comes down to things like, fish passage and.
But are we not the wrong way around? I mean, the fish, or this trout, the noxious pest that we have, I mean, where does that point of whether we've got to change completely for the right of fish pest? Because through the main road through Wedderburn to Palmerston, most of those culverts on State Highway 85 are concrete or steel culverts. And the fish still go through there because there's an element of gravel sits in them. And they will be less size than the ones that you put into the culvert.
I guess I can't really stress enough. It's the rules that we have, why we have to type it in. It's not so much us. Yes, we just have to.
So at the end of the day, the fish can control doubling the value of a bridge. That can make a difference whether we have a structure there or not.
To be fair though, 50 metres is a long way
That is.
from the culverts.
So they're not allowing us to bridge gravel and rock out to that certain amount of point as a
That would
Well, no,
actually
that-
be, yeah, factor in the wetted area. So bank to bank, what reference is actually bank to bank to be 80 metres. We think for our feasibility, we can probably get it to about 50. That's from a consenting point of view, taking into account the main wetted area, where the river breaks to.
So when do we have that discussion with, who's that, with the ORC?
Yeah, well, it would eventually be, I guess, the next step is to put forward some options for council to consider. And should the next step be going to design phase?
Yeah, so just to be clear, this is not something we're going to come in January and you're probably going to be able to make a decision and then we can go and build it. Just designing these things costs a fortune. And so we'll have to get your okay to spend money on design, and then we'll have to get consents done. So it's going to take some time.
But if we come up with clever options in the design, then that's going to replicate right through the whole region, isn't it? If we do it properly and get one that works, that's something that works in the cost-effective way, because
So
176 bridges is going to replace some of the next 20 years.
Scott's Lane is quite
You need-
an outlier because we don't have many bridges that have that kind of span in our district. They tend to be deep, short bridges rather than long, shallow bridges. You see more like what you see up on the Canterbury Plains.
Any more questions? No, well, thank you very much for that report. It's an ongoing thing, trust me, we get reminded of the Minutato and everywhere very regularly, but it's going to be a big issue at bridges. So thanks for that. Right, we're on to 21.9.13, Linda.
River and secondary street.
Right, report, this is moved, right, sorry.
A second.
Jeffrey McKinley, all those in favour?
Aye.
Yes. Carried. 21.9.13. Welcome, Linda. Proposed stop of unnamed road, Roxburgh East, off Roxburgh East Road. Welcome, Linda.
So today I would like you to consider a proposal to stop part of an unnamed, unformed road off Roxburgh East Road. The road is a small stub of road protruding into a property on the Roxburgh East Road. It does not provide access to anywhere or anything of public benefit. When the applicant came to me to discuss the proposal and how the process worked, I had a look at it and I also noticed that the road was slightly out of alignment around the side of the property. And I noted that on the southern end of the property, the applicant was actually occupying some of the legal road. So the proposal in this instance is to legalise the boundary on the southern edge of the property and to then take the land that the road is formed over up the western boundary of the property. Because the applicant is proposing to stop the full width of the road, the stopping will be processed under the Local Government Act. And stopping would require that the parcels marked C and D on page 296 amalgamated, stopping the parcels and amalgamating these with his record of title and taking the two parcels marked A and B and gazetting these as legal road to legalise the formation of the road in conjunction with the stopping. Because there is a benefit to council to legalising the formed road, the recommendation includes council and the applicant sharing the survey costs in this instance, and because it is a local government stopping, it will be subject to public advertising. So does anybody have any questions related to that?
I'll move it.
Just out of interest, do we know what the value of that land, what they're going to have to pay? I couldn't see.
No, so that's always part of the stopping process.
Further down the track.
The process is that once we have agreed to the proposal and have a resolution, we then advise the applicant and we have the area valued and surveyed. And if they decided that the valuation, if it came back and say it was I don't know, going to be $50,000, and they might go, oh crikey, we haven't got that much money, then they can, pull out of the, process at that time, subject to paying all of the costs. But assuming that it comes back at, something which they can afford and what they would expect, they would pay that cost, and then we will carry on through the process.
And the second question, if I may, do you know if there's other properties that are going to be, that's a very wide road for the width of the road, isn't it? Do you know if there's going to be other people affected?
So I would suggest that if a neighbouring property owner was looking at their boundary and considering the same type of thing, for example, then we would correct any issues at that time, but only as they present.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, does the resolution record what happens to the portion of road that we're buying in terms of how that's paid for?
So that's offset. So for example,
Just the recommendation doesn't say that. It all just says that the applicant paying for the land at valuation.
yes, but so we will take some of their land,
Yeah.
and they will gain some land, and they will pay for what they gain over.
Yes, I think the recommendation just needs to reflect that, because paying for the land.
Evaluation. So they would only be paying for the land that they are receiving, and as far as that goes. So that's how we usually keep that wording in there. It's a different.
So I'd suggest that it could be amended to say the applicant paying for the net land they are acquiring at valuation, just to make it clear. Hopefully it makes it clear.
Land valuation.
The difference. It's the net land, they're buying the net land. So I understand what Linda's saying. We're going to acquire that, they're going to acquire that.
The net area.
The net area, that goes one way. In this case, it's going to go to the applicant's way.
Can you please check that, Linda? That's the right one.
The favour of the net land curve.
No, this is the right one.
Long one.
Wrong one.
Next one.
That's the one before.
Yeah. Is it net with 1 T, 2 T?
If you put net area, perhaps,
1 T?
and net
Net
area.
area of land. I think it's 2 T's, isn't it?
Yeah, net, isn't it? Yeah.
All right, let's confirm the net area of the land.
Happy with that?
Yeah.
Steve, you still wants to move that recommendation?
Yes, right.
Yes, I do. ABC, I have a seconder for that.
Okay.
Tracy? All those in favour? Those against? Gareth, thank you. 21914, Stockton Road adjacent to Lady Smith Road.
So, just back down the road and on a road coming off of the Roxburgh East Road, we have Ladysmith Road. The applicants in this instance have applied to stop a portion of road in front of their property in accordance with the Public Works Act. So that is because they are the only adjoining owner that is affected, and it is partial work stopping. When the owners came to look at replacing their garage, they realised that it was built over the boundary and that they were in fact also occupying quite a portion of the front of the road with their garden. So they would like to purchase that the 340 squares in front of their property and have it amalgamated with their title. The difference in this instance is that the resolution is subject to a boundary adjustment being effected between the applicant and their neighbour, because the parcel of land which they currently occupy is going to be extended slightly further along the road toward the east. So it would be squared up on a rectangular basis in front of their property. They will be responsible for all costs associated, including the land valuation. Anybody have any?
Any questions on that? There must be a lot of garages and road meetings around the region that are like that.
Yes, so in this instance particularly, if you were to look at the whole of Ladysmith Road, the road is a particularly wide road and corridor, and a lot of the people have built over the road boundary into the lead road, and they could probably all be squared up if they so desired.
Just to clarify, I'd move to hear the whole paper. That was the question I was asking last time.
I thought it might have been.
Sorry
but I
about that.
didn't
I was on,
want
yeah,
to
that one's
surmise.
fine. Move myself to the next.
It's just like that.
I'm basically either light years and minutes again.
So Stephen, remove A, B and C? Yes. Single payment, all those in favour?
Aye.
Yes. Thank you very much, Linda.
Lovely, thank you.
Just on that too, Tracy and I went the other day with staff, James and Rebecca did a road trip on our pre-agenda meeting, and it was actually really, really informative, really good to have the staff in the car, cruising around, we had fish and chips, easing around the mighty Oba car. But it was good just to have a look around, and definitely bridges, when you see the size of the bridges and culverts and washouts, and the staff to get out and about. So we had a good day.
I think it's probably important to note that when they're looking at replacing bridges and structures, it's not just from here to there. They, like say if this was the span they're trying to, you've actually got to cover the entire watercourse. So even though there's only a little bit of water, they could potentially have to do 3 or 4 times the amount to cover under the new water regulations. So it's not it was really apparent it's not an easy fix at all. At all.
And the general consensus,
Oh, it's huge.
general consensus in the Minnesota and driving around the roads are in really good order. And there's been a lot of comments, including from some of our corner, how great the grader drivers are doing the job. So that's quite a thing. And the ongoing thing is always broom, but the roads are actually in pretty good nick. So to the staff involved in that and the elected members, well done.
The broom's just growing like everything else.
Broom's, yeah, broom is amazing, but it's an ongoing thing. Broom grows 7-fold a year, so if it's this big at the start of the year, it's 7 times for the end of the year. But generally it was good to get out, and I think James is keen to get the other young fellow, person working the road and part to get out for a look around, because you definitely see things differently and staff do as well. So that's pretty much us from the road, isn't it?
We're very thrilled to have such a capable roading manager join the team that can try to achieve Julie's success.
Oh, he's very good.
good.
And
He can do that.
but he's out and about, and he's always meeting people, and he's come under a bit of pressure in the Minnesota, especially with James Patterson on the bridges in the Minnesota, because people have been pretty firm, but no, he's done a good job.
Yeah, no, it's well spoken of. Everyone who's in.
Yeah.
Very good.
The fish and chips are good too, Tracy out more.
You finished?
Yeah, finished. Thank you, Neil. Sorry.
Did you have tomato sauce?
Righto, speaking of tomato sauce, we're going to talk about dangerous and unsanitary buildings policy on number 21.9.15 on page 310. We're joined by Lee Webster on Teams, so we'll just get that connection up and running. So we've got Lee.
He is there.
He's not going to see him, you're only going to hear him. You there, Lee?
Yeah, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yep. Perfect. Well spoken. Thank you. So we've got your report, and I'm sure you can take us through it, and we'll see if there's any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Firstly, my apologies that I can't be there in person, but I assure you that none of you want me there today. So with regards to this report, the Building Act requires that council has a dangerous and unsanitary building policy, and this report is a review of that policy to basically provide more information to assist our community with regards to council's approach to dangerous and unsanitary buildings, looking at the costs that are associated with that if building owners don't undertake the works as required, how we would deal with heritage buildings should a dangerous or unsanitary building be a heritage building, and it also includes a new definition of affected buildings. So for argument's sake, if I owned the dangerous building and one of you owned the building next door, you would be then an affected building. And so really it's just an overview of the policy to ensure that it maintains being fit for purpose and to outline to our community what they can expect from council should we get these types of buildings. Now, we don't get very many of them. We've only had one in the last 12 months. And from an enforcement point of view, we always link in with the building owner to remedy the issue versus having to undertake any sort of statutory enforcement action. So that's basically it in a nutshell. As part of the review, though, because there are changes to it, we have to publicly consult, and that's consultation through the special consultative procedure. And as part of the recommendations, you'll see that there's a request for 3 elected members to be on a hearing panel should we get any submissions that need to be heard, so that then a final report can come back to council with a decision to adopt the proposed policy or not. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Lee. Reasonably straightforward. Any questions?
3 people of the 3 elected members, the 3 councillors, I'd imagine. It doesn't necessarily have to be commissioners, or if the hearings panel, anybody who was interested could say, I'd be interested for whatever reason.
It could. I was going to suggest the hearings panel because there's 4 of them on it.
I'm just thinking it's also an opportunity for some who aren't on it, perhaps, you know, a couple of hearings panel people and somebody else, just for a gently easing into a quasi-judicial role.
Sorry, no, I've actually got a question, sorry, I think I'd put my hand up for it.
Well, what is the process?
Well, no, the recommendation is that we appoint a panel of 3 elected members to hear the submission, so we can do that.
Do we need to appoint the 3 now? Do we say anybody wants?
Yep.
Right, okay.
Let's see what other questions there are first.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tracy.
So I just, maybe I haven't read this properly, I'm not sure, but at 4.1, the heritage buildings.
What page, Tracy?
Page 318, it's N318. So I know of a very specific situation with a person up the valley that has got a heritage building that is very unsafe, but Heritage New Zealand has said you are not permitted to touch it.
Really?
And they tried, and it's become quite a battle. And they have access for their property, they've got access to adopt tracks, so people park there. So it's the inquisitive nature of people will go walking around these heritage buildings, and they've been told they cannot do a thing with it. And it's not fenced off or anything, and I'm just, this for me, and I'm happy to hear if I've misread it, but this to me is in direct contradiction to what that policy says.
I'm sure Lee will have an answer.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tracy. And so what we would look at is linking in with Heritage New Zealand and with the building owner to try and find a suitable path with regards to how do we ensure public safety and owners' safety, as well as the needs of Heritage New Zealand as well. There's, you know, it involves communication with all parties to try and find that process, and that's what this policy is looking at, to say that it isn't always clear cut. We will always link in with the relevant parties that we need to, but we need to ensure public safety as well.
So if I say to the person that I know who has grizzled to me about it, I will be able to say to them, you can refer to this policy and talk to council about it, because they're hot on this. They're very upset about the danger factor to their staff and to themselves, and the possibility of the public who are in that place.
100%. I'm happy to have that conversation, you know, even whilst this process is being followed anyway, and always happy to have that conversation.
Okay, thank you.
I'd imagine there'd be some remedies without a policy for the landowner to actually exclude people. Yeah, I know, but in terms of meeting his or her obligations under various other legislation, they can do the best. But the great thing is that Lee's the right person to talk to, regardless of the policy, to help out what the options might be, and maybe sometimes that third party can just provide the right path where one of those other parties just changes its view. Stephen.
What are the thoroughfares for? Who do I identify?
That's the next one.
That's the next
What's that,
topic.
Richard?
Oh, have I gone down?
You've done it, Tim.
We're back ahead of the game, Stephen.
Lee, just park that question for the next agenda item, please.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Head of the game.
Any other questions? Okay, so if we go to the recommendations that we've got on page 310, obviously A and B are reasonably simple and straightforward. The appointment of a panel of 3 elected members. It would be easy just to select the hearings panel because that would give a choice of 4. But picking up His Worship's point, I think that's perfectly appropriate, so that maybe the first thing is saying, who apart from Ian Cooney is interested?
If someone old on
If there's
it.
anyone on the hearings panel that doesn't want to, I'd be quite interested in having a look at that.
Thank you, Tammy. Anybody else?
Yeah, but
Right? I don't think you need anybody from the hearings panel with those three people.
No, so do not have to have someone old on
Huh?
it. Something.
Well, sorry, anybody else in the hearings panel?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's great.
So councillors Cooney, Alley and Patterson, you can elect your own chair.
Brilliant.
Good heavens.
Congratulations, guys.
Marvellous.
Right.
Falling down old building. Thank
So with that, that's recommendations A, B and C, moved by Stephen, seconded by Cheryl. Looked at me next.
Aye.
All in
We need
favour?
to have those names in
That's
the,
in.
Oh,
you're in, great, yes. I,
Stephen and Cheryl,
Marvellous.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Yeah, no, you're not.
Push your hand in.
I've said appoints
Don't let
councillors.
them push you around, they'll try.
Yep. Yep, that's correct. Yep.
Dismiss me on
Right,
that.
all in favour? Aye, done, carried. Right, next item on the agenda is item number 16, earthquake prone buildings. Report also, Lee's going to take us through, and bearing in mind, Lee, that you'll probably answer the question you've already got while you did this presentation.
Absolutely, and I appreciate Councillor Jeffrey's enthusiasm for this one. So earthquake-prone buildings, a little bit more complicated for this one, so I'll try and keep it as clear as I possibly can. So as outlined in my report, the amendments to the Building Act back in 2016 changed how council needs to identify and manage potentially earthquake-prone buildings. I say potentially because a building is not deemed as earthquake-prone until we've got an engineer's report that determines that it's basically less than 34% new building standard, just as an aside for that. So with this new system, it removed local policies that councils had previously to provide a more consistent national approach to dealing with earthquake prone buildings. And at the same time, it introduced a new concept of priority buildings. So council needs to identify priority buildings throughout the district by the 1st of July 2022. It's also required to identify all other earthquake prone buildings by the 1st of July 2027. And I'll bring another report to council in due course for the latter of those and provide more explanation. So when looking at priority buildings, there's a number of different aspects that you need to consider. Firstly, all the work that was done back in 2011. So there was this whole assessment was done previously. That was a desktop assessment, and some over 300 buildings were identified as potentially earthquake prone. So we've had a look at all of those, both desktop and on the ground. We've done external inspections as well. But we also have to follow what the Building Act says. And inside the Building Act, there are a number of statutory types of buildings that are deemed as earthquake prone. And so by way of example, they are buildings that hold vulnerable populations such as schools, early child centres and such. And so when we identify those types of buildings, we then have to overlay the profiling categories. And so that should be, I'm hoping, on page 322 of your agenda, which looks at such things like unreinforced masonry. Are they pre-1976 buildings with 3 or more stories, etc.? So it's kind of a 2-tier process that we need to do when we're looking at the statutory prescribed priority buildings. So we've gone through that process and looked at schools, as I say, and early childhood centres, linked in with the Ministry for Education, and we have deemed that we don't have any priority buildings in the educational realm, so to speak. We then needed to look at those buildings that are important post-seismic disaster. And so those are ones whereby the emergency services use, so their own facilities, and hospitals, as well as civil defence centres, so those that would use from a civil defence perspective. Now, as you'd expect from the emergency services, they've been working on buildings for a number of years, and when we've looked at each of the buildings that are used within our district, none of them fit the profiling. Same as the hospital as well, when we look at the profiling for that. However, there are a number of civil defence buildings that do meet the profiling, and some of those are council owned. And so by way of just a reminder that you may recall that back in June 2020, council considered and adopted the council owned earthquake prone building policy. And so the property team have budget currently for undertaking assessments and in the long-term plan for assessments and remediation of the council owned buildings within the statutory timeframes. The other layers that we need to look at when trying to identify priority buildings are strategic routes. And so that is a route whereby emergency services need to go from A to B. And in order to do that, the journey may be impeded by a building collapsing on that route that meets the profiling categories. And so we've had a look at, obviously across the district, looking at all the routes that emergency services could and would use, overlaying that with, again, those profiling criteria of A, B, and C. And we do not believe that there are any strategic routes that we have in our district. And we've come to this conclusion for four main reasons. One is that no buildings are on the routes that meet the profile categories, first and foremost, or the roads are so wide that if a building was to collapse, it wouldn't block the ability for the emergency services to go from A to B. Or again, there is an alternative route that the emergency services could go round. Or if there was a building on that route that met the profiles of A, B, or C, that they are either single story or set back from the road so much that, again, if they were to collapse in a seismic event, that again, it wouldn't impede emergency services getting from A to B. So that's the first element with regards to the consultation side of things. And just for your information, you do not need to consult on strategic routes of either any being identified or not. I have included it in the proposed consultation document simply for transparency for the community and to get the community's views if there's something that we have missed, for argument's sake. The final piece in the puzzle for identifying priority buildings is, are there any footpaths, roads, which we've collectively called thoroughfares, whereby an unreinforced building, an unreinforced masonry building, could collapse on what is considered an area where there is a significant pedestrian or vehicle traffic. Now, unfortunately, there is no direction or definition of what that looks like in the Building Act or any of the documentation that the Ministry have provided, but I have put in the agenda on page 325, you'll see a couple of tables there for areas of high vehicle traffic and high pedestrian traffic, which gives an indication of parts of our district that we would need to consider of having high levels of vehicle or pedestrian traffic, as well as having the overlay of, is there a building that is unreinforced masonry? And so if there is, that we have those two combinations, then that's what we've identified as a thoroughfare that we need to publicly consult on. And so that's where this consultation document comes in to say, these are all of the criteria that we've considered. This is where we feel across the district where we have these areas of higher risk that we need to think about. Does the community agree, or does the community disagree? And if so, why? And what other areas do they feel that are appropriate? And that's a statutory requirement to consult on this element. Following this, from a consultation point of view, is that those strategic routes and thoroughfares would go to a hearing if we had submissions that submitters wanted to be heard on. And so again, looking for 3 elected member volunteers for a hearing panel for that, with the matters being heard, and then a report coming back to council again next year to look at the potential adoption of these areas, so that then we can contact building owners to advise them that we believe that their building meets the profiling, and therefore the consequences of that is that they would have half the amount of time that everybody else who has a potentially earthquake prone building to remedy that. And so that's 12.5 years for those building owners and 25 years for every other type of building owner, which will be in the report with regards to meeting our timeframes for 1 July 2027. And I hope that made some sense. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Stephen, did you get your question answered?
Yes, I did.
Well done.
I kind of thought that, but I was thinking that the street, the Camelot Street, something was pretty wide.
So Lee, just one thing I want to clarify is that in terms of our earthquake prone buildings document, I'm going to say policy or whatever it is we've got now, does this then feed into that document as an addition, or is it standalone?
So sorry to cut you off there, Neil. The earthquake prone building policy that we have is null and void following the implementation of the amendment.
Right. So all you have now is just simply nothing more than the thoroughfares and strategic routes document.
This for the first part of this conversation. And so this is identifying areas for priority buildings. And so to give some context to this, when the work was undertaken back in 2011, we had over 300 potentially earthquake prone buildings that were identified. When we overlay that now with the new methodology, we're down to probably around about 130 potentially earthquake prone buildings across the district, of which the vast majority fit into the category to be identified by 2027.
Yeah, cool. All right, I think, yep, that makes sense to me. Any other questions?
Got a comment, Neil. The only place that I can think of that's got potential for damage near a thoroughfare is our Clyde Museum next to the rail trail with an unreinforced clay wall made by PD workers in the 80s that you don't lean these. And that's right next to the rail trail, which is actually a high use thoroughfare. So I don't know what we do about that, but there was mention of if we missed anything. I'd say that's quite a prone one.
Got that one up, Lee?
I haven't got all of my detail. Unfortunately, it's some of my stuff is on my desk, but I haven't got all of those details in front of me right now, Tim and Neil. But I will have a look at that and raise that one as well as part of consideration. If it's not included in it currently, then we can certainly have that included.
Just to clarify, as Madam CEO did, and it's relevant, it's not next to the rail trail, it's 10 metres away, it's next to the greenway. The rail trail stops 10 metres the other side.
Right.
I think without making any changes to what's been in the recommendation here, that if that does become part of it, you'll chuck it in.
Yes, just to raise it. I mean,
Yeah. Any other questions?
It's really just a comment that 2011, when those earthquake prone buildings were later found to be a number of anomalies with those initial assessments. I'm just wondering if we've got a good level of confidence in the accuracy of those 2011 reports.
You pick that up, Lee?
So if I heard that correctly, it's just in relation to the accuracy of the reports from 2011 in comparison to today?
Yes.
Yep.
So absolutely. So in undertaking this work, what we did is I linked in with a gentleman called John Gardner. So John Gardner worked for MB as part of the determinations manager, but he also was part of the leadership project that developed the criteria and the regulatory framework that we're working in today. And so he's worked with a number of territorial authorities in undertaking the assessments. And so we've used him to undertake those on-site assessments to bring that information back in-house, to provide me with an individual report for each building that then I'm overlaying with council information from the property records. So yes, I'm pretty happy that we are pretty accurate on that.
Thank you.
Louise.
Thank you, through the chair. I just wanted to add to that. There's two different things. In 2000